Welcome to today's episode of How to Kill a Bill, the podcast where bad bills go to die. My guest today is Stephen Foxley, a healthcare lobbyist from Utah. Stephen, welcome to the show. Thanks so much for being here today.
Thanks, Sunshine. I'm excited to be on.
We've talked about Utah before on this show that it is a 45-day session that meets
Yeah,
every year. There's no staff. You maybe get an intern off from college come help work with the legislators who typically also have to have a part or full-time job outside of their work as a public servant.
yeah,
What is it like for you to lobby in Utah? And I'm curious, you now cover more states, Oregon, Washington, Idaho, but you used to only cover Utah. So did you
that's right.
know Utah was unique and special before you started working in other states, or are you now realizing how different Utah is?
So we had some clients who Utah would be a hard state or an unusual state. And given that we have a 7 week session, it starts early, it ends early. People would be like, we don't want to set a precedent here because it's going to move on to another state and you're conservative, but you're business friendly. And so other states kind of look at what happens in Utah. And if it passes there, it can be popular in other markets. I would say that looking at our other states where we operate, every state is a little bit weird and unusual. You have dynamics in states that have short sessions and long sessions or have a biennium for their budget year. I don't operate in any states that don't meet every year. In Idaho, there is no constitutional end date. And so they just go until they want to stop going. So I do see some of the unique things about Utah. It's interesting. I would say, given the lack of staffing, there's a nonpartisan Office of General Counsel and Legislative Research. It's not like people are writing their own bills, but there's a very small policy staff. And to your point, most legislators, they do just get one intern. Some of those interns are shared between two representatives. And because it's 45 days, it's like a marathon and a sprint. You're rushing through, but they have to get through so much. I mean, they pass on average about over 500 bills a year plus a budget. And
So 500 bills get passed per year plus the budget. How many get introduced? What's the kill rate?
oh gosh, so there are, I think, about 1,500 bills that get requested. Either they have a title and some general description of what they are. And then we have about 800 to 1,000 in a given year that are numbered and introduced. So that where you get text and you see the body of the bill, and then about 500 that pass.
So they're passing almost 50% of the bills that get introduced.
They're passing more than 50%. Yeah. Yeah.
That's insane. I don't know if you would call it a productive legislature. How would you interpret that? Not all of these ideas can be good ideas, or are they just much more selective in how many bills they introduce?
I think they introduce way too many. Is the funny thing, and it's not evenly distributed, right? You have certain lawmakers who are really, really effective floor sponsors and bill sponsors. So they'll introduce 20 bills a year and pass 20 of them or 19 of them. And if you're an agency head or you're an established business, you're going to be going to those legislators to see if they'll run your bill for you. But I think that the legislature in the state kind of leadership is looking and saying, hey, look, we're passing too many bills right now. It hasn't always been that high. And they would like to get that number down or consolidate into fewer bills that are more broad in their subject, more general subject, but kind of an omnibus type bill, just because passing 500 and something bills every session, yeah, it's too much. People can't keep track of that in 45 days.
And you mentioned agency heads. I recall that there are people who their day job is being a state employee working for a state agency, but they are also a legislator. There's not a conflict of interest there that's allowed in Utah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We do have members of the legislature who work for the executive branch. Not something you could do federally, that wouldn't be permitted. We don't have as much of that. We also have had in the past legislators who were also lobbyists for kind of on the local level that introduced some interesting dynamics. But with 45 days, and then we meet once a month outside of the session, most of these people do have to have some other kind of day job, right? And, I'll take one example of a legislator that was also in the executive branch, healthcare focused, worked for the Department of Health. And there's pluses to that because he understands how the bills that pass how it impacts the agency, who's a PhD in healthcare economics, was an intelligent guy.
Is it the guy who wanted to do the all payer claims database?
It is, that's the guy.
That's who I was thinking of.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So, and
yeah.
he's still in the legislature.
Oh, okay, great.
Yeah, he no longer works for state government, but yeah, forever he was in the executive branch.
I want to ask you about some of the weirdest bills you've ever worked on. You and I have worked together on a lot of strange mandate bills in Utah. And a mandate bill is just something that the government says you must do, it's a mandate. So in health insurance, the state might pass a law that says health insurance must cover 4D mammograms and not just 3D mammograms, or you must cover hearing aids for children. My boss used to give out the Mandate of the Year award to the state that had the strangest or most ridiculous mandate bill. I actually had a trophy specifically made for her. It was a piece of chocolate cake with a fork sticking out of it and a cherry on top because we used to say, "This bill takes the cake." I'm gonna dig around and see if I can find a photo of it. Maybe I'll put it as the cover art for this episode. And so we would have these bills every single year in different states like, oh, health insurance must cover hula dancing and Native Hawaiian activities because the thought is that's exercise and that helps people improve their mental health through cultural traditions, keeps you from becoming obese. And I said, well,
Yep.
fine, then I want health insurance to cover my blender because I drink smoothies every day.
Yeah.
So, yeah, what are some of the weirdest bills you've ever worked on?
We've had, not in Utah, but in another state, we've had discussions around coverage of national and state park passes so that you can get people out into fresh air and recreating, right? Very good. Actually, our foundation supports giving state park passes to kids for that very reason.
Through your foundation,
Through
not
our
through health
foundation. Yeah, it's not
insurance.
a
Yeah.
coverage mandate. I'm trying to think on the weirder side, I would say this wasn't a coverage mandate, but it was one right when CRISPR and some of the gene and cell therapies were starting to come online, that it was basically that we couldn't require somebody to have a gene or a cell therapy. I think that they were worried that we're going to have some Gattaca type thing and make all of our members get some cure for something, right? There was also, right, this was kind of, you had the mRNA vaccines that were in the background, and the legislator who ran it's a really good guy, but is very closely tied to a group called the Eagle Forum, which in Utah is incredibly, it's probably the most influential single group, super conservative. We couldn't force people to edit their genes. We couldn't make them edit their own genes. And then we couldn't underwrite based off of the fact that an individual refused to have their genes edited. And we were like, yeah, I think we can agree to that one.
You mentioned the Eagle Forum is a very influential and powerful group in Utah. You said it's the most powerful, and I would beg to differ that the LDS Church has quite a lot of influence in Salt Lake City. You can correct me
Yeah,
if I'm wrong. And
yeah,
for those who don't
it's
know, the
accurate.
LDS Church is the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, colloquially known as the Mormon Church. What can you tell me about the power of the LDS Church in Salt Lake City?
Yeah. Everybody asks this. The Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, the LDS Church, they actually have they have a couple of lobbyists. They are affectionately called the home teachers here, which is a fellowshipping thing that members of the LDS Church do.
Your home
And
teacher is the person who comes and knocks on your door when you're on the list, right? In any city that you live in, if you move, your home teacher will come and say, "I'm your new home teacher," right?
they would be, yeah, like if you're a member of the church and like kind of to make sure that you stay engaged with the church. So they have a couple of lobbyists. And there are definitely issues where they choose to weigh in. They're pretty limited alcohol policy. Whenever we have an alcohol bill, the church will weigh in on that.
Explain a little bit the alcohol rules in Utah for people who don't know.
I think the easiest way that I would describe them is they take the quirkiest law that exists in any other state and then they say, let's just take all of those and do them here. We have like one dry city in the state. So it's not like you can't get a drink here, but you can't have one before certain times, or you can't have a mixed drink. And there was a time where you could have a drink at a bar, but they couldn't hand it across the bar. They had to come around and then give it to you. You used to have to, at a restaurant, you'd have to say, I intend to dine, if you wanted to order a drink before you had like an appetizer. Over time, as the state has leaned more into the tourism and some of those other things, it's definitely simpler now. But when I was younger, every bar was technically a private club, so you couldn't go into a bar unless you bought a membership, which was, it was basically a cover charge. There are still a couple of things like you cannot buy a mini bottle in Utah.
Like in a hotel, there's no mini fridge with the no little
They do
shots?
not exist. Like,
Oh, wow.
yeah, you cannot buy a mini bottle in the state. So I think that's one of the
You
ones.
just gotta buy the full bottle.
Got to buy the full bottle. Got to buy the whole thing. So they're very active in that. Immigration, refugee type issues, they've been pretty involved in over the years. Not so much a state issue, but the LDS Church has historically been very pro refugee, and there's a pretty large refugee population here. And then also, they look at their history as religious refugees, is one of the reasons they settled in Utah.
Fleeing religious persecution.
Yeah. So very want to promote pro-family, thoughtful immigration policy. And in recent years on the LGBT type issues, they actually came out in favor and helped negotiate a bill that banned discrimination for LGBT individuals in housing and employment, but right, wanted some specific carve outs for them and their activities. And that's about it. There are definitely groups and individuals who like to suggest that their position is the position of the church as a way to add credibility to their bill. And I think a lot of lawmakers, once you've been around long enough, they know that's really not an issue that the church is weighing in on. And then the other place where I would say you do get some influence is, this is not intentional necessarily, but a lot of people who are in the legislature, the LDS Church is run almost exclusively by volunteers. And so they have callings or jobs that they have to do in their community. And then the church is also organized geographically. So you go to a church based off of where you live. And so many members of the legislature have formerly served in ecclesiastic roles where they would have been made known or built a reputation, not only in their kind of smaller community, but in a broader community through their church service. And so that's one reason why I think we have a lot of members of the LDS Church who are in the legislature, and increases their influence, is because they're civically engaged and come into it already knowing a lot of their neighbors.
And how does that affect their relationships with people who are coming to meet with them? If you're not a member of the LDS Church, or let's say you're coming in from out of state, does that change the dynamic versus someone that they know from their ward or know has a role in the community? And so there's just more of an at ease or a more friendly relationship right off the bat because they know you're in good standing.
Yeah, it's a good question. I would be curious. You've done some lobbying activity in Utah. I may turn it to you first, if you don't mind. Did you experience any issues?
I feel like it's important to have a male contract lobbyist with you in
Yeah.
meetings. And I have felt that I've flown in for the day and no one really cares if I have anything to say. That will
Hmm.
be maybe 10 or 15 minutes into a meeting before I've even had a chance to speak. I don't think that that's intentional.
Yeah.
They're oblivious. I think
Yeah.
that the male members and the male contract lobbyists do not realize, and it's like, "Well, do I even need to be here? You guys could just meet without me."
Yeah. Yeah.
I did have a friend, they were no longer a member of the LDS Church, but would wear an undershirt on occasion or in certain meetings to appear as if they were still wearing temple garments, which they
Hmm.
no longer did,
Hmm.
because if a legislator sees you not wearing temple garments, then they would know that you are not in good standing or not a participating member of the LDS Church, or they might wonder if you used to wear them and you don't now. Those are things I have heard through the
Yeah.
grapevine. We sometimes talk about on this show how lobbying can feel like Groundhog Day, that it's just year after year of the same bill over and over. And medical marijuana took many, many years to pass in Utah. I heard part of the LDS Church's reason for either changing their position or not opposing it or maybe just staying silent was because of healthcare costs?
I guess I would be skeptical if that was the reason. That is an interesting one, though. It ended up passing by ballot initiative here, but there was this big question of what will the church do? Eventually, they came out and said if it's prescribed, you can still be a member in good standing. And if you've worked with your doctor, basically, if they took their hands off of it. And when that
This is
happened,
medication and we don't
yeah,
stand in the way of people
yeah,
getting
they're yeah.
medication.
So and I think that part of it was they had a lot of membership who were asking and talking about it. And where do you draw the line if you're doing it in consultation with your doctor? And so when that happened, that gave the green light for a lot of people, and it made that ballot initiative it was tight. There are only 7 ballot initiatives that have passed in the history of the state, but that gave it a big boost and really helped its passage. And so that's not them taking a position. They took a position, but the position was, we have no position.
Which is a big message in some cases.
Yeah, for sure. And kind of back to your last question, I'm probably in a different spot where I'm from here, grew up here, white man. I would say, though, one of our contract lobbyists has had the kind of situation like you described where a legislator may not want to meet with them one on one. And one of the things that I've said is that if you have a lawmaker who says that to you, we don't give campaign checks to people who don't meet with us.
Is that a female lobbyist and the lawmaker
Yes.
won't meet one-on-one? Mhm.
Yeah, yeah. And that's not only in Utah where we've run into that issue. It's okay to say it's your job. We're doing our job. Campaign contributions are part of how the political system works, love it or hate it. And if you don't want to meet with us, I don't think that people should be getting campaign checks if they're not willing to meet with you.
We talk about on this show, obviously, it's called How to Kill a Bill. For example, water it down
Yeah,
into a study. We need to study this issue more. It's
yep,
not ready to pass this year. Running out the clock is a great one in Utah
yeah.
because it's a 45-day session. What are your tools in your toolbox? Or do you have any advice for people on how not to try to kill a bill, things you've tried that have backfired?
Yeah, I think the one that you're going to hear over and over again is if there's a fiscal note or fiscal impact. Fiscal notes are the number one thing. The kind of other stuff that I would say is, yeah, seeing if it's something that could be studied or a pilot program saying, hey, look, this sounds like a really interesting idea. We need more research. There could be things about timing, right? You could put a sunset on a bill. I don't think that sunsets are usually all that effective. That's like a giveaway. If I'm a legislator, I would say, well, we'll put a sunset on it, knowing that it's going to get extended. Sometimes we have looked at that, and there is one example where we had a bill, we hated it, we put a sunset on it, and 3 years later, we kind of came back and said, hey, all these bad things that we said were going to happen, they did happen, and it did sunset. There's definitely things where you can play into House and Senate dynamics. This bill, we know it's going to come out of the House, so we're just going to concentrate all of our efforts into killing it in the Senate. Or it's going to come out of the House, and it's going to come out of the House looking really weird. And so maybe rather than trying to fix it over there, we kind of let it come out as bad as possible. And then when you're in the next body, you can say, look, this is not something that you want to be touching.
And now there's no time to fix it.
Yeah, yeah. I had one where it was so athletic trainers for years and years and years have been trying to get a coverage mandate in Utah. And athletic trainers, they provide services like so if you're with a sports team, if you twist an ankle while you're playing baseball or something like that, and they tape up your ankle, that those services would be billable to an insurance company. I think there's like 1 or 2 states that maybe pay for it. It's not common. So we had a senator who the bill was judiciary amendments. It has nothing to do with healthcare, but the definition of healthcare provider that he used was in the medical malpractice code, and he added athletic trainers. And he knew what he was doing, so we found it had already passed the Senate. And this is maybe not the best strategy, but we went and we got good government people and we got the medical association and we got a whole bunch of other groups who were like, hey, this bill was not vetted and you need to pull it back. It had passed the Senate, but it hadn't yet been introduced in the House. There's an actual sheet of paper that has to be attached to one actual copy of the bill. And they were like, we are recalling that bill. And then it went away, and honestly, he lost a ton of credibility on the issue, and the athletic trainers lost credibility on the issue because if this is a good idea, let's debate it in public. Let's not do it privately.
Yeah, you're not being transparent, you're being sneaky.
Yeah, that was a way that we were able to get it down.
And so their strategy backfired.
Yeah, totally, totally. But if it had passed, I mean, it would have been brilliant. I would have like hats off to them. Legislators do the same thing. There was a bill on telehealth. Normally, healthcare bills in Utah go to the Business and Labor Committee or they go to the Health and Human Services Committee. And this one went to Natural Resources. You're like, how did the legislator get that? And there's a whole bunch of rural people who are on that committee, and they're like, we love telehealth. And
But how'd they get it referred to natural resources,
that was good lobbying by the member, right? And so,
right? They have to
and
lobby their own rules committee chair.
for sure. And it got out of committee and then it ended up getting defeated on the floor. So there's tons of games that we're playing those a little bit. Members are sometimes playing them. And I would say it's easier on our side to actually kill a bill because process works both ways. So if there's a good process, it's harder to kill a bill. If there's a bad process, it's easier to kill a bill.
Any final thoughts as we wrap up?
This may sound kind of stupid, but one thing is that I do look at our legislatures, and for the most part, they're very representative of the states that we're in. And love it or hate it, I think that they represent, for the most part, the will of the people. And the other thing is, from a lobbying perspective, some of the most effective groups that we've gone up against over the past couple of years, we will always lose when you have a real constituency that is organized and has a clear message. And one example I will give about this is around autism. And in Utah and in all of our states, you had a group of parents who got together and they said, we want coverage for autism therapy. And they talked to their members, to their legislators. I think everybody in the legislatures knew somebody in their community who had autism. And we got up there and we made our arguments about certain things that they should be considering or coverage limitations or X, Y, and Z. And folks were like, look, this is our community and I'm hearing it from my constituents. This is a real need and we're going to pass it. And luckily, I think us as a business, we got on board with that and we're like, great, we know it's going to pass. Let's figure out a way to pass it in a responsible way. But we will always lose to a real advocacy group like that. And so I would say, like, if you have an issue that you really care about and you can organize a coalition, you can, people talk about corporations having money and influence, and all of that is true. But that does not mean that you do not have influence as an individual. And I see it every day and every year in the state houses where I'm working.
We talk about that on this show that if you want to get involved in citizen lobbying, sometimes it's just about knowing how to organize, knowing how to navigate the process. This hearing is on this date. We all need to show up and get in line to speak. And we teach people on this show how they can use some of the same tactics that paid lobbyists use to kill a bill.
For sure. Thanks, Sunshine.
We hope you enjoyed today's episode and please share your reaction in the comments below. Have you ever lobbied in Utah? What was your experience? As always, if you have a funny, shady, or interesting story you'd like to share, reach out to us in the comments, visit howtokillabill.com, or email us, and maybe you can be a guest on a future episode. Don't forget to like, share, follow, and subscribe so you never miss new content and to help our podcast reach a wider audience.